Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the iconic traveler's destination, Venice. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. Lyla woke to the sound of water lapping against stone, a sound so specific to Venice that even half asleep, she knew exactly where she was. September light filtered through the shutters of a small hotel room, casting stripes across the tile floor. She stretched and sat up, aware of a faint thought lingering from the night before. Venice. She'd finally made it to Venice. Her friends had been encouraging her to go forever. They couldn't believe that a traveler as intrepid as she, with a passport book with so many stamps, hadn't been. As if there were some fundamental law of travel, a deck that required Venice to be one of the cards. The truth was, Lyla had avoided Venice precisely because everyone said she had to go. The photos looked beautiful, yes, but they also looked crowded. Overwhelming. Like a theme park version of Italy, with gondolas and tourists and someone's romantic fantasy projected onto every canal. She'd imagined herself stuck in a throng of selfie stick-wielding visitors, unable to find the real city beneath all the tourism. But here she was, because curiosity had finally won over skepticism, and because she finally wanted to have a different answer to her friends' frequent inquiries than, "Nope, never been." Lyla dressed and headed downstairs, where the hotel's small breakfast room overlooked a narrow canal. She helped herself to a cappuccino from the machine. Decent, though she suspected every coffee in Italy probably met at least a minimum standard of quality, and a cornetto filled with apricot jam. Through the window she watched a delivery boat navigate the canal with impressive precision, the driver standing at the stern like some sort of aquatic cowboy. After breakfast, she stepped outside into the Venetian morning. Her hotel was in Cannaregio, a quieter neighborhood away from the main tourist crush. The streets here, though streets seemed like the wrong word for these narrow passageways between buildings, were already alive with activity. A woman leaned from a third-story window, calling down to someone Lyla couldn't see. A cat sat on a doorstep, regarding passers-by with the bored superiority cats everywhere seemed to perfect. Lyla had a rough plan for the day, see some of the major sights, because she was here and it seemed foolish not to, but also wander and get lost and see what happened. She consulted the map on her phone, though she'd already noticed that her phone's map seemed charmingly confused by Venice's layout, and started walking toward San Marco. The path took her over bridges and through passages that opened and closed like a maze designed by someone with a sense of humor. She'd think she was heading in the right direction, only to find herself at a dead end overlooking a canal, forced to backtrack and try another route. At one point, she passed the same gelateria 3 times, approaching it from different directions each time, and she could have sworn the woman behind the counter recognized her and was trying not to laugh. Maybe she should just give in and order a stracciatella, but it was still early. Eventually, the passages opened up, and Lyla found herself in Piazza San Marco. And yeah, okay, it was spectacular. The piazza spread before her like a stage set. The basilica at one end, with its Byzantine domes and gold mosaics catching the morning light. The bell tower, the campanile, rose against the blue September sky. Elegant arcades lined the square on three sides, their arches creating a rhythm of shadow and light. It was also, as expected, extremely crowded. Tour groups clustered around guides holding colorful umbrellas aloft. Vendors sold everything from carnival masks to light-up toys that seemed wildly out of place. And the pigeons, there were so many pigeons, strutting around with the confidence of birds who knew they owned the place. Lyla walked through the square, taking it in with the odd feeling of seeing something she'd already seen 1,000 times in photographs. It was like meeting a celebrity. The basilica was exactly itself, exactly as advertised, which was somehow both impressive and slightly anticlimactic. Near the water, she saw the gondola stands and she chuckled to herself. The gondolas were beautiful objects, certainly, sleek black boats with their distinctive faro at the bow. And the gondoliers looked the part in their striped shirts and straw hats. But there was something almost theatrical about the whole setup, like everyone involved was playing a role in a very old play. She watched a gondolier help a couple into the boat, the woman wobbling dangerously as she stepped down, clutching her partner's arm. The gondolier steadied her with practiced ease, probably having prevented hundreds of tourists from tumbling into the canal over the years. Once they were settled, he pushed off with the oar, and the gondola glided into the canal traffic, immediately getting stuck behind a water taxi and a delivery boat stacked with crates of vegetables. Lyla smiled. There was something charming about the gap between the romantic ideal, gliding serenely through Venetian waterways, and the reality of rush-hour canal traffic. She decided she didn't need a gondola ride herself. Watching them was entertainment enough. She bought a ticket for the basilica and joined the line, which moved steadily if not quickly. Inside, the space was dark and glittering, every surface covered in gold mosaics that seemed to absorb and reflect the light in equal measure. Biblical scenes played out across walls and ceilings, the figures stylized and solemn. It was beautiful in an overwhelming way, and after about 20 minutes, Lyla found herself ready to step back into the sunlight. Outside, she bought a small bottle of water from a vendor whose prices made her wince. Apparently, proximity to San Marco came with a significant markup, and decided it was time to get away from the tourist center. She wanted to find the Venice that existed beyond the postcards. She started walking, choosing directions at random, following her instinct more than any map. She crossed the Rialto Bridge, which was predictably packed with tourists and shops selling Murano glass and leather goods. But once she descended on the other side, the crowds began to thin. She found herself in a neighborhood where actual Venetians seemed to live their actual lives. Laundry hung from lines strung between buildings. Small shops sold practical things: hardware, stationery, vegetables. She passed a tiny bakery with a window display of bread and focaccia, and the smell was so good she almost walked into a lamppost. Lyla ducked inside. The baker, a woman with flour on her apron and an expression that suggested she'd been up since before dawn, looked at her expectantly. "Focaccia?" Lyla said, pointing at the window display. The woman nodded and pulled out a piece, wrapping it in paper and handing it over. Lyla paid, noticing with approval that the price was about a quarter of what she'd paid for water in San Marco, and stepped back outside to eat. The focaccia was still warm, olive oil soaking into the paper, salt crystals visible on top. She ate it as she walked, and it was perfect, simple and perfect, the way good bread always was. She continued wandering, feeling more relaxed now that she'd left the crowds behind. The neighborhoods here were quieter, more residential. She passed small campos, squares, where children played and elderly residents sat on benches, watching the world go by. No one was taking selfies, no one was consulting a map. It was just life, happening at its own pace. In one narrow alley, she discovered a small osteria tucked into a corner, its entrance marked only by a handwritten menu board and a few tables outside. It was nearly lunchtime, and Lyla was hungry. She claimed one of the outdoor tables and studied the menu, which was in Italian with no translation. Always a good sign, she'd found. A waiter appeared, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a wide smile. "Buongiorno," he said, and launched into an explanation of the day's specials in rapid Italian. Lyla wasn't feeling very food adventurous today. She pointed at the pasta option, and the waiter nodded approvingly. "E da bere?" he asked. "Un bicchiere di vino bianco, per favore," Lyla said. "Ottimo," he said, and disappeared inside. The pasta, when it arrived, was extraordinary. Spaghetti alle vongole, simple but executed perfectly. The clams were tiny and sweet, the garlic present, but not overwhelming. The pasta cooked exactly al dente. Lyla ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching the alley's activity. A woman passed with a shopping cart, calling out a greeting to someone in a window above. A cat emerged from a doorway, stretched luxuriously, and disappeared around a corner. This was the Venice she'd hoped to experience, the one beneath the tourist layer, the one where people actually lived. She felt a small sense of victory at having found it. After lunch, Lyla continued her wandering, crossing bridges and following canals with no particular destination in mind. She passed shops selling carnival masks, some clearly made for tourists, others behind glass in galleries, works of art rather than souvenirs. She passed churches, their doors open, their interiors dark and cool and quiet. She passed small campos where stone wells stood at the center, remnants of the city's ancient water collection system. And then, on a tiny street that barely qualified as a street, she found the record shop. It was called Dischi Volanti, Flying Records, and the window was stacked with vinyl albums in slightly chaotic piles. Jazz, classical, rock, Italian pop from decades past. The door was propped open, and Lyla could hear music drifting out, something funky and synthesized, definitely from the 80s, with an Italian vocal floating over the top. She stepped inside and immediately felt at home. The shop was small and crammed floor to ceiling with records. Wooden bins held thousands of albums, organized by some system that probably made sense to the owner. Posters covered the walls, Miles Davis, Chet Baker, Italian artists Lyla didn't recognize, and what looked like original artwork from Italo disco singles. A turntable sat on the counter, the source of the music. She could see the label now, something called Cosmic Disco. Behind the counter sat a man who might have been 50 or 70. It was hard to tell. He had wild grey hair and reading glasses, and he was bent over a record, examining it closely. He looked up when Lyla entered and nodded in greeting before returning to inspecting it. Lyla began browsing, running her fingers along the spines of albums. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just enjoying the treasure hunt aspect of record shopping. The jazz section was extensive. She found albums by Art Blakey, Thelonious Monk, a beautiful Italian pressing of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. But it was the Italo disco section that really caught her attention. She'd always enjoyed this genre, that distinctly Italian take on electronic dance music from the late 70s and 80s, but had never really explored it, and certainly not in Italy. "You like jazz?" the man behind the counter asked, in accented English. "I do," Lyla said, "very much. But I'm also curious about this." She gestured to the Italo disco section. His face lit up. "Ah, you must learn. Italo disco is very important, very special." He stood and came around the counter with some excitement. "Let me show you." He pulled out several albums, handling each one with reverence. "This one?" he said, holding up a record with artwork showing a woman in futuristic clothing against a starry background. "This is Gaznevada. Very good. The production, the synthesizers, perfetto." He pulled out another. "And this Cano?" They were more famous, more commercial, but still very good quality. He continued pulling records, explaining the history of Italo disco as he went. How it had emerged from the Italian club scene in the late 70s, how producers had embraced new synthesizer technology, how it had influenced house music and techno. The display of enthusiasm was infectious, and Lyla found herself genuinely interested. "The vocals," he said. "Sometimes they are in English but not always correct English. Sometimes it is just sounds, you know. The words don't matter so much as the feeling." He put on a different record, and a bouncy synthesized melody filled the shop. The vocals breathy and dreamlike. "You see? It makes you want to move, to dance. But also it is a little bit strange, a little bit mysterious." Lyla listened, nodding. There was something appealing about the music. It was dated, certainly very much of its time, but also joyful and unpretentious. "I like it," she said. "Of course you do." He seemed delighted. "Now for jazz you must see this section." He led her to a different area, pulling out albums as he went. "This Bill Evans, very beautiful. Very sad, but very beautiful. And this?" He pulled out an album she didn't recognize. "This is an Italian jazz pianist, Giorgio Gaslini. Not so famous outside Italy, but very talented." They spent the better part of an hour going through records. The owner, Roberto, she learned, pulling out recommendations and telling stories about the artists, the labels, the history of Italian music. He showed her rare pressings, explained the difference between various European and American releases, pointed out details in the artwork and production credits. "You are a serious collector," he said finally, the same phrase the owner in her imagination had used, but this time it felt earned after their extensive conversation. "I love vinyl," Lyla said, looking at the stack of albums she'd accumulated. She'd found a pristine Chet Baker record, a Miles Davis compilation she didn't have, the Bill Evans album Roberto had recommended. And for Italo disco she'd chosen 3, the Gaznevada record, one by Cano, and a compilation called I, Robots, that Roberto insisted was essential. "These are excellent choices," Roberto said, carefully placing each album in protective sleeves. "The Chet Baker especially, this pressing is very clean, very good sound." He wrapped everything with the care of someone handling precious objects. "You will enjoy these very much." As he rang up her purchase, he added, "You know, not many tourists come in here. They go to the mask shops, the glass shops. But music," he sighed and spoke slowly, "music is the real soul of a place, no?" Lyla couldn't agree more. She paid for her records, and Roberto handed them over in a sturdy bag with the shop's logo printed on it. "Enjoy Venice," he said, shaking her hand formally. "And when you listen to these records at home, you remember this little shop, yes?" "I will," Lyla promised. Outside, Lyla felt buoyed by her finds. There was something deeply satisfying about discovering a good record shop in an unexpected place, about connecting with someone over shared love of music. She continued walking, now carrying her bag of records, and found herself in the Dorsoduro neighborhood near the Accademia. This area had a different feel, more artistic, more bohemian. Art students from the nearby university sat on the steps of bridges, sketching or just talking. Small galleries displayed contemporary art alongside traditional Venetian paintings. She wandered into one gallery, its white walls a stark contrast to the Baroque excess of the basilica. The art was modern and minimalist. Photographs of Venice at odd angles, paintings that used the city's colors but abstracted its forms. Lyla spent a pleasant half-hour wandering through the rooms, appreciating the artist's different perspective on the city. By late afternoon, Lyla found herself near the Zattere, the long waterfront promenade facing the Giudecca Canal. She'd read about this area, supposedly less touristy, popular with locals for evening walks. She found a bench facing the water and sat down, setting her bag of records carefully beside her. The view was lovely. Across the canal, the island of Giudecca stretched low and residential. Boats passed by vaporetti, private boats, the occasional water taxi. The light was beginning to change, that golden quality that made photographers love late afternoon. Lyla watched a vaporetto dock and disgorge passengers, then load up again and chug away toward its next stop. She thought about her friends' insistence that she visit Venice, about her own skepticism. The city had surprised her, but not in the way she'd expected. Yes, the famous sights were as advertised, beautiful but crowded, impressive but packaged for consumption. But the real Venice, the one she'd found in bakeries and hidden osterias and tiny record shops, that Venice had been worth the trip. As the sun descended lower, Lyla decided she was hungry again. She walked along the Zattere until she found a small restaurant with outdoor seating, its tables facing the water. The menu looked promising: seafood risotto, grilled branzino, frittura mista. She claimed a table and ordered the risotto and a glass of prosecco, feeling she'd earned a small celebration. The risotto arrived in a shallow bowl, creamy and perfectly cooked, with chunks of shrimp and scallops. Lyla ate slowly, watching the light change over the water. The prosecco was dry and bubbly, perfect for the warm September evening. Other diners chattered around her in Italian, and she caught fragments of conversation. Something about someone's daughter, someone else's renovation project, a debate about the best way to prepare octopus. At the table next to her, an elderly couple was finishing their meal. The woman was speaking animated ly, gesturing with her hands, while the man listened with an expression of amused tolerance. "Ma no, Giulia," he was saying, "non è così semplice." "Certo che è semplice," the woman Giulia responded, tu complichi sempre tutto." The man laughed, reaching across to pat her hand. "60 anni insieme," he said, "e ancora mi dici che complico tutto." "Perché è vero," Julia said, but she was smiling, and there was such affection in her voice that Lyla found herself smiling too. The waiter came to clear their plates, and the man asked for 2 espressos. "Naturalmente," the waiter said. "Subito." Lyla smiled at the warmth between the couple. 60 years together. She watched as they waited for their coffee, their comfortable silence speaking of decades of companionship. After dinner, Lyla walked back toward Cannaregio as the city transitioned into evening. But the September night was so pleasant that she found herself reluctant to return to her hotel just yet. Instead, she wandered, letting her feet carry her through neighborhoods that were becoming familiar. Lights began to appear in windows and along the canals. The tourist crowds had thinned considerably, and Venice took on a different character, quieter, more intimate, more itself. She crossed bridges she was sure she'd crossed before, though from different directions, and found herself in small campos she didn't remember seeing earlier. In one such campo, a group of teenagers had gathered, sitting on the steps of a well, passing around a bottle of something and laughing. Their voices echoed off the surrounding buildings, full of energy and youth. An older woman leaned from a window above and called down to them, not scolding, just acknowledging their presence. They called back, their tone respectful, and the woman retreated, leaving them to their evening. Lyla continued on, her bag of records, a comfortable weight on her shoulder. She passed a small church. She'd lost track of how many churches she'd seen today. Its door open, a few candles flickering inside. On impulse, she stepped in. The interior was simple compared to the basilica, just a single nave with plain wooden pews and a modest altar. But it was peaceful, and the candlelight created dancing shadows on the old stone walls. She sat in a pew near the back, not praying, just sitting in the quietness. Outside, the sounds of the city were muffled, distant footsteps, the lap of water, a snatch of music from somewhere. Inside there was only the soft flicker of candles and the sense of countless others who had sat in this same spot over the centuries, seeking their own moments of peace. After a few minutes, Lyla stood and continued her walk. She crossed one final bridge and found herself on a small fundamenta, a walkway running along a canal, where a few locals sat outside a wine bar, glasses in hand, talking and laughing. A musician was playing guitar nearby, something classical and Spanish sounding, and the notes drifted across the water. Lyla paused, leaning against the bridge railing. A gondola passed below, this one carrying what looked like locals rather than tourists, a family maybe, out for an evening ride. The gondolier wasn't performing or singing, just rowing steadily, and there was something beautiful in the simplicity of it. The family was quiet, just enjoying the evening and each other's company, and as they passed beneath the bridge, Lyla caught a glimpse of a small child, perhaps 4 or 5, staring up at the buildings with wonder. The scene made her think of Roberto's words, "Music is the real soul of a place." But maybe it wasn't just music. Maybe it was these moments too, the elderly couple at dinner, the teenagers in the campo, the family in the gondola. The real Venice wasn't in the grand sights, but in these small human moments that played out every day, regardless of how many tourists passed through. Smiling to herself, Lyla continued toward her hotel. The streets of Cannareggio were quiet now, most tourists having retreated to their hotels or to restaurants in more central areas. She passed shops with their shutters drawn, apartments with warm light glowing behind curtains, and the occasional late-night trattoria with a few dedicated diners still lingering over their meals. When she finally reached her hotel, she felt pleasantly tired, the good kind of tired that comes from a day spent exploring. The night clerk nodded to her as she passed through the small lobby and climbed the stairs to her room. Once inside, Lyla set her records carefully on the desk, pulling them out one by one to admire again. She was already looking forward to getting home and listening to them properly, with a good pair of headphones and all the time in the world. Through the window, the canal reflected the lights of the buildings opposite, wavering and dancing on the water's surface. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour, 9 o'clock, their deep tones reverberating across the city. Lyla opened the window wider, letting in the night air and the sounds of Venice settling into darkness. She changed into comfortable clothes and sat by the window watching the reflections shift and change. A couple walked past on the fundamenta below, their voices soft and content. A cat, possibly the same one she'd seen that morning, trotted across a bridge with purpose, heading towards some feline destination. The water lapped against the stones in its eternal rhythm. The sounds of Venice drifted up. Footsteps on stone, a snatch of laughter from a distant party, the soft splash of water against the canal walls, and faintly, very faintly, what might have been music from one of the bars still open on the main thoroughfares. It was a lullaby the city had been singing for centuries, and tonight Lyla let herself be carried by it. She thought about tomorrow. She might venture to the islands, Murano or Burano, with their glass factories and colorful houses. Or she might just wander again, following canals to wherever they led, trusting the city to reveal itself in unexpected ways. Maybe she'd go back to Dischi Volanti and talk more with Roberto about music and Venice and the connection between the two. But that was tomorrow. For now, there was just this moment, the gentle lapping of water, the soft light reflecting off the canal, the satisfaction of a day that had exceeded her expectations. Venice had won her over not by being what everyone said it would be, but by being more, by offering glimpses of itself to those willing to look beyond the gondolas and the crowds. The city sounds continued their nighttime symphony. Lyla pulled a chair closer to the window and rested her feet on the sill, letting the cool air wash over her. Across the canal, someone was playing a piano. She could hear it now, the notes clear and precise. Possibly Chopin. Possibly something Italian she didn't recognize. The music floated across the water and through her window, mixing with the other sounds of the night. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting it all settle into her. The skeptic had been silenced, the traveler had been rewarded. And tomorrow, she would message her friends, with photographic evidence that she had finally done it. But for now, in this moment, there was only Venice, real, surprising, and worth revisiting.